English translation 250th contact. Wednesday, 26th of October, 1994, 16:23 hours.
Be greeted, my friend Edward.
Oh, it is Yupta. Welcome, I am happy to see you. I had just stepped away a little.
You also seem to be quite tired. If it is meant to be, then I will come back later.
Certainly not, my friend.
Then so be it. I am to greet you lovingly from all whom you know, but also from many who are unknown to you face to face and by name. Greetings from my daughter Simya Se, and also from Quetzal to all group members, whereby I also join these greetings.
Thank you. You have a lot to do?
That is indeed the case. The same applies to Quetzal, who is still not available to visit you. But he promises you a visit as soon as possible.
Fine, but as I know your time terms, then can that soon may last some time. Nevertheless, I'm looking forward to it, even if his appearance should not be for years. These pass ever faster anyway. As it seems to me, which of course is not true in reality, but only seems so, because you have so much to do, that there is no time anywhere to do everything in decisive time. The older you get, the more you have to do, which is why time becomes more and more filled with work and reflection, etc., so that you no longer perceive how time passes. I also had to think about this when I worked through the old contact reports of Ascot and myself yesterday, which still contain predictions in relation to my life. Such as, for example, that from the year 1995, my life should become a little easier, in the sense that the thorns should slowly become a little less, which have always scratched me so far.
Your words are extremely trivializing about the facts, but they hit the nail on the head, even if it has to be said that the changes will only appear incredibly slowly and drop by drop, and indeed so, that they only appear imperceptibly. Nevertheless, you will still have to endure many hard and painful blows, which will rain down on you from your own family and hurt you, as has already been predicted to you by Ascot, as well as attacks on you from outside will continue to take place and harass you. 1995 is probably the turning point, but you must not hope for anything from it in the form that all evils would visibly disappear. Especially from within your own family, many thorns will still be pricking you, tearing inflaming wounds and causing you distress.
It will be manageable.
Someone other than you would surely break from it, or someone else would also have broken from all that you have done so far. For my part, I would not be able to do that. But you always take on new courage and continue your way unswervingly. How you manage to do this again and again is indeed a mystery to me.
You know, somehow it just goes on, even if sometimes everything screams and howls in you. But we really should not talk about that any further now, because there are more important things that come up for entertainment. Since our last conversation, there have been a lot of questions that I want to ask you, if that is okay with you?
Of course, but I would like to discuss some things with you afterwards.
We can then, of course. So here's my first question. We already talked about homeopathy and Bach flower remedies together once, and you explained that they are not applicable for curing diseases, because various diseases cannot be cured with homeopathic remedies and Bach flower remedies. However, this also applies to medicines of modern orthodox medicine, etc., because such medicines cannot cure a wide variety of illnesses. One must not only think of cancer, but also of many other diseases, especially those of which little or nothing is known in medical science. Homeopathic remedies and Bach flower products, I remember your words, are so far good and right if they contain sufficient amounts of the decisive active substances to be used for diseases which can be influenced benignly by these remedies. Otherwise, they are to be rejected as humbug, just as conventional medicines of orthodox medicine, if they are unsuitable or even dangerous for the corresponding diseases. The actual homeopathy and the Bach flower therapy are basically alleged cures in which the diseases are treated with high dilutions. As a result of the effect, phenomena are to be caused through which the symptoms of the disease are first intensified. If sick ones also take such remedies, then they are supposed to be affected more by the symptoms of the disease against which the remedy is supposed to be effective. In the case of patients, it may therefore be that they show increased symptoms after taking the drug and, so to speak, counteract a climax. The remedies of homeopathy and Bach flower remedies cannot be regarded as actual active agents, because they are absolutely useless in this sense, and therefore as dilutions, as you say. Nevertheless, the active ingredients used for homeopathy and Bach flower therapy are effective if they are not diluted.
A distinction must be made between remedies consisting of pure active ingredients and those consisting of dilutions. Pure agents do the job, but dilutions are useless and ineffective. The lowest permitted dilution is to take the remedy with a little liquid. This applies to all curative active substances which are obtained as essence from plants. Crystals, quartzes, salts, minerals or precious stones, etc., whereby many substances and possibilities are still unknown to earthly medicine in this respect. With regard to Bach flower products and homeopathy, even low dilutions have very little or no healing effect. All medicinal active substances of any kind contain information which becomes effective when the medication is taken. Therefore, not only the active substance is important for a cure, but also its information. Thus, every active ingredient, whether toxic or non-toxic, soft, hard, liquid, gaseous, or crystalline, etc., has its information to fight a disease. But this has nothing to do with homeopathy or Bach flower therapy. An active substance molecule is bundled with countless other active substance molecules, and each individual carries within itself certain information which is impulsively delivered to the sick body and brings it healing. This is the case with both natural and orthodox remedies. So the active substances of all substances, elements, matter, and substances of all kinds are information carriers in infinite numbers. That means each active substance molecule is, as already explained, bundled with innumerable other active substance molecules, whereby each one carries very specific information in its own form and kind and radiates or emits this uninterruptedly. As you have described in your book note, existent life in the universe. Every tiny particle and molecule impulsively sends out its own information and signals, which buzz around at supersonic speed and affect all other innumerable particles and molecules, etc., resulting in a certain understanding and communication that connects everything in the universe with each other. The active substances of medicines, whether in the form of homeopathy, Bach flower theory, orthodox medicine or chemistry, etc., impulsively radiate their information in accordance with their form, which become effective against the corresponding diseases, attack and destroy the pathogens. When medicinal agents are introduced into carrier fluids in highly diluted form, they lose their efficacy depending on the degree of dilution. The more the carrier fluid is diluted with the active ingredient, the more impossible it becomes to combat pathogens. As far as homeopathy is concerned, this name comes from the Greek language homoiopates and means in a similar state or similarly sentient. Homeopathy is a cure that does not use substances directed against the symptoms of disease in the treatment of diseases, but uses substances that, in high doses, induce similar symptoms in healthy people as the diseases against which they are applied. Ultimately, it results that, as a rule, the belief and the thoughts and feelings of the human being also lead to healing success in the application of homeopathic remedies and Bach flower therapy. And it is a fact that active substances which are already given in lower dilutions do not have any real healing effect, neither do those which are very highly diluted.
This is now once understandably explained. Thank you. Your explanation also corresponds to that of Ketzel, who said that homeopathic remedies are unsuitable as active agents, because in higher dilutions they are only information carriers. Incidentally, he also spoke of the fact that many medications of all kinds, including orthodox medicine, etc., are not effective through their active ingredients themselves, but only through their impulses and information or signals.
That is correct.
Good. The next question? Again, various earthly astronomy scientists claim that the universe is only 8,008,000,000 years old, based on certain statements about galaxies with regard to their escape velocity, etc., as fathomed by the Hubble telescope. For my part, I find this assertion a stupid joke. On the one hand, astronomers have already discovered galaxies, etc., at distances of more than 10 or 12 billion, 10,000,000,000, or 12,000,000,000 years. And on the other hand, they are not yet able to see into larger distances, because they are not yet instrumentally capable of doing so. But the mere fact that galaxies, etc., were detected at a distance of more than 10 billion, 10,000,000 light-years contradicts the nonsense of 8 billion, 8,000,000 years of universe ages, because the light of objects at a distance of 10 or 12 billion, 10,000,000,000, or 12,000,000 light-years on Earth could no longer be perceived at all if the universe were just 8 billion, 8,000 years old.
The astronomy science of the Earth humans is only in the beginnings and therefore still extremely unsatisfactory. Consequently, scientists also lack the basic knowledge of the structure of the universe, and thus also the knowledge that the universe consists of 7 different belts, which have a total age of just over 46,046,000,000 years, calculated since the Big Bang. So, astronomy scientists also lack the knowledge that the material universe, the material belt, is only one of 7 belts that make up the universe as a whole. Also missing is all knowledge about the fact that the material belt, the material universe, is classified as a continuous becoming and passing, and thus nothing is of infinite permanence. All universal objects and forms of life of the material belt, the material universe, become and pass in permanent succession and become a recurrence and reoccurrence, entirely according to the universal causality and thus according to the law of cause and effect, which classifies all existences of every form of the coarse and fine material, as well as everything of the superfine material of the spiritual and its energies. Thus, the material belt, the material universe, is also arranged in a steady becoming and passing away, whereby no aging occurs, but a steady youthfulness remains until the time when the contraction occurs, thus the contraction of the universe again. This ensures that the entire universe, and thus also the material universe, is kept young, evolutionary, and creative from the point of the first instant of the expansion to the moment of contraction in constant succession, and thus does not deteriorate due to aging. Thus, the universe will probably become older in years and time, but there will be no aging process in the sense that something will become outdated and thus unstable and unevolved. Exactly the opposite is the case, because through the causal becoming and passing away, the old is transformed into the passing and the new. However, only the state of the forms change, whereby no annihilation or destruction takes place, but only a transformation from which something new results from the old. Thus, the material universe will be kept young in permanent succession in its entire extension, which is much larger than earthly astronomers have been able to fathom until today. Unfortunately, However, they will still indulge in false ideas, suppositions, and assumptions in this regard for a very long time, as they also still assume false presumptions in this respect for a long time. They are also very self-opinionated, and they are subject to a narrow-mindedness that has something to do with megalomania and autocracy.
The constant process of renewal is also the reason why, as a rule, only young matter can be found that is between 4 and 6 billion 4,000 and 6,000 years old, at least as it is here on the Earth, while you said that you have pieces of matter that are almost 40 billion years old. But I find it simply funny that the Earth astronomers now claim that the universe is only 8 billion years old. So far they can see and hear in little more than 10 to 15 billion, 10,000 to 15,000 light years distance from those distant galaxies, etc. to the Earth. However, light needs 10 to 15 billion, 10,000 to 15,000 light years and more, and thus much longer than astronomers claim again that the universe is old. Idiotic. But something else. Again, sick lunatics claim again that everything is less dangerous with the depletion of the ozone layer, or that the evil has been completely eliminated.
This is, of course, absolute nonsense, because the destruction of the ozone layer is still increasing, which will still be the case for several decades to come. Whereas in 1993 the ozone layer was reduced by 4.6%, by 1st October 1994 the ozone layer had already been reduced by 5%. The destruction of the ozone layer is therefore still increasing.
You mean an annual ozone layer destruction of 5%?
That is the meaning of my words.
Good. Thank you. My next question. Can you officially explain how things are to be seen in relation to UFOs with regard to their origin? I am referring to the fact that unidentified flying objects do not only come from our space-time continuum, but also from other dimensions. We have never really talked about this in detail, but mostly only superficially and in passing.
That is right. So, I want to give some information about it in a little more detail than usual. Let us start with the unidentified flying apparatuses or flying objects, etc., which are of purely terrestrial human construction. This kind of flying object exists in a larger number in different forms. These are productions of the most diverse states of Earth, which, however, keep their research and products secret. Of course, they cannot avoid doing test flights, etc., with their flying apparatuses, whereby they can often be observed by Earth humans of all social classes, thus by simple citizens, as well as by well-known title holders, etc. Some of these constructions have flight abilities that go far beyond the normal understanding of Earth humans and mock the normal aircraft construction, as well as the normal flight abilities of the normal terrestrial aeroplanes. These missiles also have forms that do not correspond to those of known airplanes, which is why they appear strange. For these reasons, when observed by the uninitiated, they are not recognized as earthly constructions and are consequently referred to as UFOs, unidentified flying objects. However, this also includes observations which have no connection whatsoever with such objects, but which can be traced back to cloud formations, as well as swarms of insects or birds, or to natural atmospherical or gaseous luminous phenomena, etc., also undersea gas escapes, which cause the water to bubble at the sea surface, as well as sensory illusions and balloons, kites, zeppelins, normal aeroplanes or light and ultralight aeroplanes, etc., belong to it. With all these things, which appear very frequently, it should be absolutely clear that they are not interplanetary flying objects, and thus not unidentified flying objects of extraterrestrial human life forms. If we consider a further form of terrestrial flying objects, which are considered UFOs, and which are not of extraterrestrial origin, then we have to speak of those flying machines which originate from the terrestrial future in terms of their dimensions to the space-time continuum prevailing here. So we are dealing here with flying objects of earthly origin, but built in a dimension of the future on the Earth, whereby Earth humans living there in the future have found the ways of time travel, whereby it becomes possible for them to travel back into their own past and thus also into the present time on the Earth. So these visitors are not extraterrestrial intelligences either, but also inhabitants of Earth, whose technology is many centuries and sometimes even thousands of years ahead of the present time of Earth humans and in the future. Further forms of unidentified flying bodies concern life forms that are actually extraterrestrial and that also belong to this space-time continuum which prevails here. Such life forms with their flying objects visit Earth only very rarely, except for 3 different races, which have been flying to Earth for a long time, apart from us Plearan, of course. Furthermore, Earth is also approached here and there by extraterrestrial human life forms, which happens. However, extremely rarely and is to be counted often in decades or in centuries, who come with their flying objects from parallel space or from parallel planes to the space-time continuum predominant here, like, for example, we ourselves, who live in a parallel space which, shifted by fractions of a second, is affiliated to this space-time structure prevailing here.
Sorry to interrupt. On the one hand, you talked about Earthlings who live in the future and visit Earth from there. That is what you call time travelers.
Of course.
But what should we call those who simply come from parallel spaces?
According to your sense, we simply call it transfer or parallel transfer.
So nothing that would be complicated to say. But just go on with your explanations now. Does it actually happen frequently that humans with their flying machines come to us from parallel spaces and come to Earth?
No, that is very rare, apart from us and our allies. In contrast, however, it is more common for bioorganic flying objects to appear in this space-time continuum, not only on the Earth, but also on many other inhabited and uninhabitable world spheres. So we can observe such bioorganisms, as we call them, also on our worlds, whereby we do not know, however, yet exactly which kind these life forms are now. The dimension changers, as we also call them, are larger and smaller airworthy bioorganic life forms, which are often fluorescent or very brightly radiating and located in a parallel space or parallel universe. In their type, they are absolutely harmless and even playful. They often appear individually or in smaller groups, ranging in size from a few meters to several hundred meters in diameter. They live in a parallel space that we have not yet been able to access, whose data we know well, but into which we have not yet been able to penetrate in form in order to establish communicative contact with these forms of life. It is about the same with the malicious skrills, with which we can hardly communicate, but which are not flying objects like the dimension changers, but which can only move on solid ground and live in a parallel space. Finally, only those extraterrestrial intelligences are to be mentioned who come from the Dael universe and visit Earth. However, this is so rare that this was only the case once during the last 50,000 years when Asket maintained contact with you for 11 years. Another such contact is not planned.
Sure, I know that. But may I ask a question about the name of what you call your system beyond our space-time continuum? Together, we always speak of the Pleiades, by which we mean only the distant and specific place from which you come. For instance, while you name your system differently in our time-shifted parallel space. Can we perhaps now speak openly about it and name the right name, which is almost identical to the Pleiades?
We have talked about this before, and I explained to you that this does not have to remain a secret, even though we might want to continue to use the name Pleiades, because that is how the name came to be.
But to my knowledge, this conversation is not listed in a contact report. Did we perhaps discuss this outside of the usual contact meetings?
That may be, yes.
Well then, I will now officially say that you call your star system Pleiades, but you name the system's suns and the planets equally, as we call the stars of the Pleiades in our space-time continuum.
That is correct.
On Earth, besides dinosaur traces, there are also human footprints that are millions of years old. These are both impressions that are still of normal size today, as it were, and those that are gigantic and thus originate from gigantics or giants, etc., and are much older in origin than the oldest traces of hominids found, or their bone findings, which can only be traced back to about 4.5 million years, although Earth-born humanoids lived 9 to 12 million years ago. However, there are also ancient impressions and human footprints in small and large form next to dinosaur traces or elsewhere, which are between 65 and 140 million years old. How do you explain this when the first primeval human, hominid life forms on the Earth lived at the earliest 9 to 12 million years ago? I really mean prehistoric humans.
This is neither a secret nor a riddle, because all footprints of human beings of all sizes, from the dwarf-like beings to the giants, etc., are not traces of terrestrial human life forms. The impressions truthfully come from humans of planets, not from Sul who visited Earth many millions of years ago or came here to live here. Many of them also died here, whereby petrified traces, footprints, and bones can still be found in many places on the Earth today and bear witness to this fact. Earth humans only existed 9 to 12 million years ago.
Well, new findings of hominids, you told me a long time ago, are found in autumn of the year 2000 in East Africa, in Abyssinia or Ethiopia or something like that. According to your words, the bones will then be estimated at about 5 to 6.5 million years. With the hominids, I mean, of course, only bones of these. But now the scientists still claim that the last member of the primeval hominids is the Lucy find, which proves that the Darwinian lie theory corresponds to the truth, namely that man is descended from apes. This, although it is known in initiated circles, which is stubbornly concealed, that Darwin, in order to prove his lie theory, filed and assembled monkey bones.
This actually corresponds to Darwin's work at that time. And of course, the scientific claim of today is erroneous and completely false that the findings of the remains of the hominid life form Lucy represent the link between apes and humans. Because in truth, humans did not descend from the apes, but the ape had the hominid human life form as its origin. This hominid human life form was an upright walker from early on, and thus a life form that walked on its two legs on the ground, but nevertheless also lived on trees for safety reasons, for which the feet and toes as well as the hands and fingers were shaped and formed accordingly. One could call these beings land tree humans.
My next question relates to very early events on the Earth, namely meteorite and comet impacts. I am especially interested in those events that belong to the Cretaceous-Tertiary boundary, so about 65 million years ago. You once explained to me that at that time at least one large meteor crashed into the Mexican basin of Yucatan, and thus near the same peninsula in northern Central America, between the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea, and triggered that worldwide catastrophe, which then extinguished the dinosaurs and all larger living beings.
I myself explained these early occurrences to you. But I only spoke of this one small planetoid or meteorite, which had a diameter of 10,000 meters and exploded when it touched the sea surface and a part of the land mass of the peninsula. At that time, this was not the only great meteorite that hit the Earth, but it was only one of a chain of 48 large, larger, and smaller space projectiles, which flew in a line one after the other towards Earth and hit it. A chunk, 11,000 meters in diameter, subsequently bore down on the north coast of America and exploded into the Atlantic Ocean, traveling at a speed of more than 100,000 kilometers per hour. Only hours later, the next impact followed in today's state of Iowa, USA, which led to the Manson crater known today. According to our estimates, the relevant object from outer space was about 2,300 meters in diameter. Gradually then, and within about 20 days, the remaining small and smallest further meteors crashed to Earth, creating a few more small craters around the world, but they were not significant.
In Yucatan, the crater measures about 170 kilometers in diameter, if I am not mistaken.
You are not mistaken.
Well, then another question. The Greens, that is a political group, and other environmentalists always make a hell of a scream because of the truck transports that transport all kinds of goods on the roads. They all want everything to be transported by rail, because this allegedly pollutes the environment less with exhaust fumes, dirt, etc. They all want to see everything transported by rail. An assertion that is not true, as you once explained to me. Although I myself am also in favor of rail transport with electrical energy if it is generated cleanly by hydroelectric, wind or solar power stations, this is really only because it would be the cleanest and most environmentally friendly solution. But it would only be because unfortunately it does not exist. In Switzerland, for example, about 43% of all electrical energy is currently produced from fossil fuels, and about 37% from nuclear power plants. Hydropower produces only a meager 20%, which means that 80% of all electrical energy is produced by polluting, poisoning, radioactively polluting, and destroying the environment. This alone proves that electric vehicles, for example, are just as much polluters and destroyers of the environment as railways. Although they do not pollute and destroy the environment through their direct operation, they do so in very large quantities in an indirect form by requiring electrical energy, which is produced in such a form that the environment and all life are impaired in their existence and health. Electric vehicles and railways, for example, produce up to 57% more emissions, air pollution, environmental degradation, and endangerment of life than would be the case if goods and passengers were transported by petrol and diesel oil vehicles on the roads. Fossil fuel and nuclear power stations also promote the greenhouse effect much more than petrol and diesel transport vehicles, which of course cannot be counted among the countless passenger cars that also contribute an enormous percentage to all environmental pollution and to the destruction of the environment and life-threatening and greenhouse effect. Is that now right, as I am saying?
No doubt, yes.
Then I would like to come back to the age of the universe and ask you some questions about how I remember them according to your teaching. If there is anything wrong with my questions, please correct me. You have taught me that the expansion of the universe has continued since the so-called Big Bang, and continues until contraction sets in. While in the outermost universe belt, in the so-called Ram belt, the expansion speed actually remains constant. It continuously decreases in the material belt or material universe in a certain half-life period, as is also the case with the speed of light. Just as the entire seven-belt universe expands, so too do all galaxies expand in themselves, while at the same time they are also assigned to an escape velocity, through which the galaxies push outward, namely to the outer edge of the material belt or material universe. At the same time, they are classified as an incessant process of becoming and decaying. whereby they can only exist for a certain number of billions of years before they are transformed back into gases, from which new galaxies, stars, and planets, etc. emerge. The existence of a galaxy is between 12 and 40 billion, 40,000 years, depending on what kind of galaxy or other entity it is, and what cosmic events occur around it. At the edge of the material universe towards the inner belt, that is to say towards the core belt, energies arise from the inner belt area which penetrate outwards into the material belt, and thus into the material universe, in which everything then becomes compressed and becomes new coarse matter. This oldest originated original energy or original matter is to be calculated with an age of approximately 46 trillion, 46,000 years. Exactly this time, as the universe is old. But since this ancient matter is classified in a constant change of becoming and passing away, it transforms again and again back into the pure form of energy, out of which it then becomes condensed again and becomes coarse matter. Thus, it results that no coarse matter can be found in the material universe that is older than about 40 billion, 40,000 years. And so it also happens that the first energy of a galaxy, a star, a nebula, or a planet, etc., is hundreds of millions, or even billions of years older than the material structures themselves. As, for example, it is the case with Earth. First energy came up already some 646,646,000 years ago, while Earth by itself was condensed some 46 billion years ago, by still liquid matter of half-gas-like kind, while the real solid planet existed only 4,6 billion, 4,000 to 6,000 years ago. First energy, from which the Earth originated, is younger than first energy, that is to say first matter of our Milky Way, because first energy drove through space with high flight speed and was then captured by our galaxy hundreds of billions of years after, when this first energy from the inner belt entered our material universe. And when our astronomy scientists search for the Big Bang, they can never find it, of course, because on the outer side of the material universe, they only come across the next belt, which does not contain any matter of a coarse material form, and into which they are unable to penetrate with all their instruments, as is the case on the inner side of the material universe, where they can only penetrate to the inner belt. Scientists will not be able to penetrate up to the actual universe core, that is to say creation core, at all, so they will not be able to recognize its radiation and swinging waves, etc. What they can recognize and grasp in this respect are only the swinging waves and radiations of the outer and inner material universe belt, and thus the two universe belts, which enclose the material universe outside and inside. It has to be said that the black holes also explode again when they are compressed enough, from which new galaxies, nebulae, stars, and planets arise. These black holes are gigantically large in relation to the original Big Bang mass, because in the Big Bang, the total mass of the explosion site was not larger than a flea, as explained by Genesis, while a black hole in compressed form can have entire planetary or solar dimensions. It is also interesting to mention that in the free space, so-called electromagnetic space, currents predominate, as you have explained to me, so there are enormous magnetic fields, as well as a factor according to which one can divide space into a north and a south gradient, so to speak. This also results in the fact that the galaxies, etc., rotate both in the right and in the left direction, that is to say clockwise or counterclockwise. And once again, I have to say that human beings from the Earth, etc., are never able to penetrate to the edge or into the core of the universe, even with their best telescopes and other devices and apparatuses, but always only straight to the inner or outer borders of the material belt, or the material universe, where the inner and outer belt form insurmountable barriers for distant observations of all kinds.
There is no mistake in your explanations.
Well then, the next question. Can you give me information about the facts from which your time and linear measures result?
An explanation in this respect would be too far-reaching. And on the other hand, it is still too early to give more details about it officially, because certain results can be obtained from it, which must not yet be accessible to earthly scientists.
I do not want to know the formula, etc. either, but only the basic factors from which your time and length calculations emerge.
Both result from only one factor, the light, whereby its speed and distance are fundamentally decisive, namely in a vacuum.
And what is so mysterious about it?
The calculation formulas and various resulting profound insights, which lead to further dangerous insights and conclusions, and are applied and can lead to catastrophic consequences if used carelessly or irresponsibly. A very great danger, which unfortunately still exists to a great extent among earthly scientists of many kinds, who immediately exploit and abuse everything they experience or invent anew, militarily, greedily for power and profit, irresponsibly, murderously and fatally.
Unfortunately, you speak a true word. But this irresponsibility, which you mentioned, also prevails elsewhere. For example, among all those who should be concerned that the overpopulation on the Earth be drastically, rigorously and radically restricted by a worldwide 7-year birth stop in a decisive form, such as perhaps alphabetically ordered or in any other logical manner. All those responsible for this, however, who were, for example, also at the Cairo Overpopulation Conference, are not at all suitable for it, by which I mean that they are in no wise suitable for recognizing the real, evil truth of overpopulation and all its devastating consequences on the one hand, and for taking really valuable measures against all the overpopulation evil and its consequences on the other hand. No, on the contrary, they are all only interested in hoarding their own coins, on the one hand, and in making a good life for themselves on the other. They also let themselves be chased into the fence and terrorized by idiotic, religious fundamentalists and conservatives, etc., as happened at the Overpopulation Conference in Cairo, where Islamic conservatives and fundamentalists also played off their power against a birth ban and birth control, as well as against effective family planning and contraception with evil threats, as also the representatives and defenders of the Vatican's parasite-in-chief did, whereby he, the Pope, remained victorious another time with a hollow grin and wielding a scepter, while the terrestrial humankind and the whole world through his followers, as well as representatives and defenders' guilt, fall faster and faster into misery and downfall. Also, the other responsible persons of this world, the rulers, etc., are complicit in it, because they are not only equally invested like the Pope and his henchmen as well as the other fundamentalists and conservatives, but they also make false and lying statements and have false statistics compiled, by which it is to be proven that everything is not half as bad as alleged prophets of doom make public. For example, false statistics are used to falsely claim that there are currently just 5.5 billion, 5,500,000 human beings living on the Earth, whereas in reality there are already 6 billion, 6,000,000. The claims of this kind always lag between 300 and 500 million behind the real number. That is so, is it not? Anyway, Quetzal Simya Se, ask it, and also you have so explained it.
That is right. At present, on the 15th of October, 11 days ago, we recorded earthly humanity with a number of 6,101,463,017 persons.
You see, that is how it is. And do you know what was a major concern of certain stupid elements in Cairo? Rather than that they had spoken about overpopulation reduction through an appropriate worldwide birth stop? You would not believe it. Women and men mistakenly believed that the world population could be reduced if women were given more rights and enlightened more. Not a word, however, about the fact that worldwide rigorous and radical action must be taken immediately with a birth ban if further evil is to be prevented. I and all other reasonably thinking humans have no objection whatsoever to women all over the world finally being accorded and granted the same rights as men. Nor can there be any objection whatsoever to good education and training for women on a worldwide basis. Quite the contrary. But all this does not solve the problem of the constantly growing overpopulation in the slightest, because only immediate radical and rigorous measures to stop births can be helpful. And this also includes the possibility and the right of abortion, if this happens within the framework of creational natural laws. This also includes the emergency right to prevent surplus human beings. Family planning is good and right in normal times, but to talk about family planning now that the world is full of people who are already destroying everything is criminal. I am talking about family planning, as it is currently practiced, and is not designed to reduce humanity by means of a real, purposeful, and appropriate worldwide birth ban. Instead of real and radical measures being taken, lowly intelligent and stupid nonsense is talked around, with senseless arguments and proposals discussed and empty straw threshed. But let us leave it at that. It is no use after all. But what do you think of the Scientology sect?
It is an unreal pseudo-religion that strives for a financial political world power and even wants to become world-dominating, whereby any meddling means of a material kind is just as acceptable for it as also any psyche-destroying act against human beings who succumb to the sect. Brainwashing is a common process, as are death threats and assassinations of members who have jumped out or of persons who are hostile or simply disapproving of the sect. Any malicious means is deemed good enough for the sect to achieve its bold and exploitative and psycho-slave goals. Thus, they also carry out questionable machinations regarding drug programs in order to bring even drug addicts into their power. Thus, these undertakings are also only means to an end, whereby unstable, illogical thinkers and those incapable of living are led astray, deceived, exploited, and thus misled and turned into Scientologist handlers whose power of judgment and ability to recognize truth is not only suppressed but is also underdeveloped. This so far, if I may speak with your words.
Naturally, I could not have said it better. But there is a question that relates to statements of Asket and Simya-se. The two spoke in their time often of the fact that a nuclear destruction of the Earth, etc., could create disasters that would affect other universes. Somehow, however, the worm seems to be in these statements, because I cannot imagine that other universes can be affected by a planetary destruction.
This is also true because such destruction has no influence on other universes if they are outside of this creation universe. This is what you mean by the worm, which is apparently given in the statements of my daughter and of Asket. But the two spoke not of foreign creation universes, but of this universe's own universes, into which destructive effects are very well possible if planetary or galactic destruction take place.
Oh well, you mean that Simya-se and Asket each spoke of parallel universes, and thus of other space-time continuums that are located in our creation universe.
Right?
Then all is well. The matter was simply unclear. So large format destruction in our material universe can also have a destructive effect on other space-time continuums or parallel universes. I did not know that. What happens there, basically, or what can happen there?
The barriers between different dimensions are torn, whereby the destructive forces can spread into other dimensions or even into other universes or space-time continuums and act there.
Aha, now everything is clear to me. Then I have the next question that refers to euthanasia, both direct and indirect. Both forms are practiced and championed here on the Earth in different circles up to vehemence. In America, a Dr. Jack Kevorkian even developed a suicide machine, which he makes available to suicidal people for a good fee, with corresponding poisons, which are put into the machine in order to cause death, if the suicidal person then activates the machine according to his or her own will. There are also many doctors, etc., who simply sell poisons to the suicidal, often at sinfully expensive prices, with which they can then carry themselves, or with the help of others, from life to death. In addition, I find that any form of active or inactive, and so as any direct or indirect euthanasia, is murder, as well as suicide. The human being does not live to kill himself or herself, or have themselves killed at will. Both, I find, correspond not only to a boundless cowardice, but also to an absolute irresponsibility towards oneself, as well as towards life, evolution, and the creational laws and recommendations. The human being has their life, and lives it, in order to live life evolutively in all responsibility. The life itself, as well as the honor and responsibility of the human being, demand a conscious permanence until the natural end of life. And truthfully, it takes strength, intellect, and courage, as well as a great responsibility, inestimably much more than it takes to kill oneself or to be killed. Courage, strength, love, intellect, and responsibility are indeed needed for life, but not for cowardly murder or suicide. Murder or suicide, however, cannot be seen as murder or suicide and cannot be judged, so if terminally ill people, who are perhaps still plagued by severe pain, insist that they are not connected to life-supporting machines and equipment, etc., or maltreated with purely life-supporting drugs, etc., in order to continue to maintain the extinguishing and naturally dying life as dearly as possible by all conceivable means. To reject such measures, I think, has nothing to do with suicide or murder, because it only guarantees natural dying, which is the absolute right of every human being, on which he or she can and may insist. However, this really only applies if a person is truly consecrated to death and everything is not just a pure life-supporting measure that delays the inevitable death by machine, apparatus, medication, etc. Pure painkillers are of course not affected, because they are not only life-supporting, but also pain-relieving.
This irresponsible evil of euthanasia or indirect euthanasia, as well as suicide, is well known to us. And none of these forms can be approved by us because they all violate the creational laws and recommendations, and thus the responsibility of the life and the evolution. No responsible Earth human can agree with these murders and suicides either. All these forms are despicable and inhumane.
The natural dying is one of the last experiences and the greatest experience in the life of a human being, which is never given by suicide or by letting oneself be killed.
That is a true word.
Another question. Ozone also damages and destroys all small plants, flowers, shrubs, and trees by damaging and destroying photosynthesis. That is to say, the entire buildup of organic substances from inorganic substances, with the help of sunlight. This, of course, refers to the ozone that is on Earth's surface and in the lowest layers of air. Are not human and animal life forms also affected?
Of course. Humans who are particularly unstable in terms of their health suffer particularly badly, and more deaths are occurring in this regard.
Prostitution. Do they also exist on Era?
This Ausartung, to get very badly out of control of the good human nature, has not existed with us for a long time, but it is still prevalent to a low degree among various Federation peoples.
And what about sexually transmitted diseases?
Such diseases are no longer present in any wise, not even among those Federation peoples where prostitution is still common in a limited form.
You do not know of AIDS either, but how is it on Earth? Do you know the number of annual cases of infection for the whole of the Earth?
The trend is rising, and according to our investigations, the annual number of infections amounts to around 3,000. A large part of the infections is caused by the spread of the disease by refugees and emigrants from various countries. These not only carry the AIDS epidemic, but also many other diseases such as cholera, typhoid fever, plague, tuberculosis, and many others. Infectious pathogens are transmitted to other healthy people in foreign countries in which the diseases have long since been eradicated or are unknown. In those infected in this wise, pathogenic mutations occur, which in turn lead to new diseases and epidemics, for which there are no remedies in the end. All those who support refugees, emigrants, and other homeland refugees in their efforts in this regard and are helpful to them in many forms contribute to this. The genetic mixture and the resulting genetic changes alone lead sooner or later to the misery of a global deterioration of human health, complacency and effeminacy, while new epidemics and diseases result from it.
Another question regarding prostitution. Why do some of your Federation peoples still have prostitution?
There are only 3 of them, and they are still very young in our Federation. They were accepted into our Federation only a few years ago. And the efforts to abolish prostitution are running in controlled final forms, so that in less than 8 to 10 months, these peoples will also be freed from this inhumane bad habit.
Nice to hear. I have another question. Estrogens lead to feminization in male life forms. Can you tell me where or what estrogens are found everywhere on the Earth?
It would be going too far if I gave you all the facts, so I will limit myself to the essentials. Pesticides, medicines, chemicals, and foods that contain or develop estrogens are particularly worth mentioning. Very important are nonylphenols, which produce estrogens on a large scale. Estrogens themselves are in turn converted into other forms in other parts, which are not or only very difficult to recognize as estrogens at first glance, at least when I think of the still quite inadequate research methods of the earthly scientists. In fact, estrogens cause sex changes, as you said. This also applies to all altered or self-transformed forms. Generally speaking, it is mainly the weakening of the physical body that results, leading to immunodeficiencies and diseases, as well as rapid physical and mental overload. But also consciousness is weakened and impaired, and so also the creation of ideas, thinking, feeling, and acting. Real humanity transforms itself into false humaneness, and even into false humanity or false humanism, as you have so well created these word imprints.
My next question. Surely you know the sign or danger symbol for radioactivity that is customary here on the Earth, yes?
Certainly.
Good. Do you use the same sign or something similar in this relationship?
No. We use an ancient symbol that has no resemblance whatsoever to the sign used by Earth humans. Since time immemorial, we have used a bat symbol as a hazard image for radioactivity.
This is interesting. Is this perhaps related to the bat symbols found in ancient Egyptian pictorial writing?
That is right. The bat symbol as a hazard image for radioactivity already existed with our early ancestors who came to the Earth from the Lyra regions. The symbol thus found its way onto the Earth with various peoples, whereby in ancient Egyptian regions in particular, it was used as a warning sign for anything that in any form had to do with radioactivity. Especially the priests of Egypt at that time often handled radioactive materials and then marked their works, etc., with the warning sign of the bat symbol. It was also their own custom to mummify the deceased with radioactive substances, which also caused grave robbers to become radioactively contaminated and ill at all times, often resulting in death, which also applies to archaeologists. Thus, the radioactivation of corpses was, on the one hand, a means of mummification, and on the other hand also a means of preventing the robbing of corpses and mummies by body and grave robbers, which already existed in very old times. As protection against such robbers served not only the radioactivity, which was gotten from uranium pitch ore, uranium mica and carnotite, and is both chemically and radiologically very poisonous, but also extremely long-lived and effective poisons and gases were used for many millennia.
I know. There were pure deadly contact poisons as well as poisons in which Figidindia spines were soaked. That is to say, hair-thin spines of the Indian fig, a cactus fruit. The mummy bandages were then coated with it in order to keep grave robbers away or to punish them if they desecrated the mummy. The hair-thin thorns penetrated into the skin at the slightest touch and thus spread death. Some poisons were such that they brought agonizing deaths only slowly and over many years, while others brought rapid deaths.
Deadly gases were also used, which were immediately released when the mummies or burial objects were touched.
These gases were then inhaled by the grave robbers, etc., as well as deadly floating poisons, which immediately impregnated the air if there was even the slightest movement. Well, your explanation should make it clear that the bat symbols on mummy graves, etc., in Egypt and the surrounding area have indicated since ancient times that the mummies, etc., are radioactive and that danger emanates from them. But now I have another question. Again and again, new stories about the Bermuda Triangle arise, where there was a dimensional gate until the end of the 70s. Since then, however, according to your statements, this has disappeared. Nevertheless, one hears, again and again, unbelievable stories of events which are supposed to take place there. What is it about?
With a few, very few exceptions, about which I do not want to give any further details, because only a nonsensical and unworldly speculation would arise from them. If they became known, they are completely natural occurrences. Under the seabed, there are huge earth chambers with gas hydrates, either in purely gaseous form or frozen as ice. This is usually methane gas. If submarine landslides or seabed movements take place, which are quite frequent in themselves, without seaquakes, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, etc., then the gas hydrate depots of the seabed can be uncovered by creating cracks in the seabed, releasing the highly pressurized gases or causing the ice masses to gasify tremendously quickly and shoot at a rapid pace to the sea surface, causing it to foam and bubble over large areas. The bubbling waters are interspersed with gases and lose their load-bearing capacity, whereby ships, for example, which get into the bubbling waters, sink without rescue, capsize and often explode, tearing into thousands of pieces if the highly explosive earth methane gases penetrate into the ships and ignite, exploding from some tiny sparks, as for example at electrical installations and so on and so forth. Such gas explosions usually have a more powerful effect than bomb explosions, whereby the ships are torn into tiny pieces and can no longer be found. The enormous gas masses escaping from the seabed also escape naturally into the atmosphere and dilute the air enormously, whereby also this loses the carrying capacity. This, of course, means that when planes get into such areas, they are robbed of their airlift capacity, causing them to crash. The air simply becomes too thin for the heavy aircraft, so it no longer has any load-bearing capacity. These flying craft, too, are usually torn to pieces by enormous explosions when the gases ignite on the aircraft engines or other propulsion units, or on electrical systems via tiny sparks. It also happens that engines and other propulsion equipment, as well as radio systems and compass systems, etc., suddenly malfunction or fail, just like highly sensitive electronic systems of all kinds. A fact that comes from the fact that the seawater, brought to boil by the rapidly rising gases, produces negatively charged ions which form a field of negative electrical energy over the sea surface and high into the atmosphere, with a special and strong magnetic field, in which all technological devices and apparatuses, etc., are disturbed and faulty or even fail if these come into the negative energy range. On the other hand, engines can suddenly stop in the gas-choked, thin air due to a lack of oxygen, which can cause aircraft to crash and be torn apart by impact with the sea. Engines can also suddenly overheat due to lack of oxygen, etc. There are many possibilities in which ships and aircraft can disappear into the Bermuda Triangle without ever being found again and without supernatural forces, etc., being involved. By and large, there are always natural causes that lead to such events, which is why humans should seek solutions for their secrets less in the supernatural than in reality.
Whereby the so-called supernatural, of course, does not exist in any wise, because every and each thing is always naturally explainable and also naturally given. The supernatural exists only in the ignorance and the incomprehension of humans, because they have no knowledge about all those things which they cannot understand and cannot explain themselves. Truthfully, everything so-called supernatural is absolutely natural, and thus also classified according to the corresponding laws of spirit or matter, which are able to give an explanation for everything and everyone, whereby something supernatural becomes a fact of non-existence. Everything that can be grasped and perceived, everything that can be seen and heard, and everything that can be felt, recognized, experiential and tangible, etc., is always real, actual and natural in every case, regardless of whether it takes place on a spiritual or material level, or on a middle level between spirit and matter, which is so often called the level of the extrasensory or the supernatural by parapsychologists and esoterics who do not understand it.
A true word.
Do you know Phobal Cheng?
Oh, no, who is that?
In 1964, I was in India, in Marauli.
Yes, you lived in the Buddhist Ashoka Ashram on the Gurgaon Road at that time, at Indeed with Swami Dharmawara. Of course I know that, and we talked about it only recently.
Right. Now the monk, Swami Dharmawara, is the grandfather of Phobal Cheng. Phobal Cheng is the little girl who was 10 years old at that time and also lived in the Ashoka Ashram with a brother who was 2 years younger. Of course, we knew each other very well, but then we did not see each other when I was there again with my wife in 1967, only not to return there afterwards. Last year now, you will not believe it, a 40-year-old Cambodian woman suddenly appeared at the UFO fair in New York with Wendell Stevens and explained to him that she knew me from Mehrauli, India, and that she had also seen Ascot when she visited me. She also explained that she often, like many others, saw Ascot flying around with her beamship and so forth. Recently now, this Phobal Cheng came here to visit, and it turned out that it was indeed the little girl from then, of course, now 30 years older. Her grandfather, Monk Dharmawara, is now 108 years old and lives, like Phobal Cheng and her brother, in America. Swami Dharmawara, so I know, is one of those Earth humans who had contact with two mysterious humans. Phobal Cheng confirmed that to me again, who just appeared out of nowhere with him and disappeared again in the same way. So it was the same kind of disappearing and coming back as if you beamed me into the ship or back to Earth. The look of these two mysterious men who visited the Swami was the same as his, therefore Asian. Can you explain something about it to me?
Officially, I can only confirm that this is true. But these are not intelligences who were located beyond the Earth, if that is what you think. They were probably distant descendants of extraterrestrial humans, but they were earthbound, even if they mastered the ability of the craftless journey, which was handled by technical means. The how, what, where, and why, etc., I unfortunately cannot and must not officially explain, which is why I can only explain this to you in confidence.
I would really like to know, because I could not find out where they came from at that time. I never had the opportunity to talk to them, so I had to be content with observing them.
Then I want to explain some things about them to you after our official conversation.
During the last time I have dealt a little more thoroughly with Nostradamus, as well as with his so-called prophecies. I never had any reason to do so before. Recently someone asked me about Michel Nostradamus and other visionaries. So I tried to do these things. My knowledge was this: Nostradamus was indeed a seer who foresaw many things. But many of his statements are not actual prophecies, as it is generally so gladly seen, because often they are prophylactic warnings, so to speak, if I may say so. With this insight, I have also found out that so far, in fact, none of those persons have found the key to the Nostradamus statements who claim that of themselves. Moreover, the realization of the Nostradamus statements depends on the fact that in world politics, no improving situations are created, which would change the course of world events, etc. for the better, as this must be the case with prophecies if they are to be fulfilled. This fact also applies to statements of other visionaries, etc., which appear in large numbers. Also, religious fanatics and abysmal sectarians are among them, whereby particularly these are given in extremely threatening form, like for example also the 3 prophecies of Fatima, with which the third tells, as it were, of an end of the world with all worst horrors and atrocities and of unspeakable infernal agonies, which are to break in the second half of the 20th or in the course of the 21st century over the earth and the entirety of humankind. No one other than Jesus Christ and God personally should bring all these inhumanities and ungodliness over earthly humanity, because it is oh so rejected and godly. As the Bible has always done, the human being is threatened with divine murder and manslaughter, as well as with terrible divine revenge. More or less all seers and prophets who do not think purely in terms of the creation, and are somehow religious or even sectarian, make such threats. Especially now this appears again more often, and especially strongly, because a millennium change is coming closer and closer, just the year 2000. Since Emmanuel's calculation of time, centuries and millennia have always been associated with fear and terror among Christians from the very beginning, which is why the doomsday preachers and prophets of doom, etc., have been accumulating strongly at these times, driving many human beings to madness and suicide with their sectarian doomsday idiocy, as is also happening again in the present time. The religious fanatics and all kinds of religious sectarians are now in high season again. But these are also mainly the ones who transform purely prophylactic warnings of seers and real prophets into enormous threats and blasphemous assertions, as well as the statements of Michel Nostradamus, who was actually medicus, healer, astrologer, and alchemist of his sign. Truthfully, not many of his prophecies have arrived yet, but only just 14%, which is why one has to be extremely careful with the term seer. What will come out in terms of his prophylactic statements for the future will be proven in the time to come. According to his statements, if all his warnings and also the prophecies are true, a great deal will be changed in this world. With a review of Nostradamus's manner of working, I also found out that only after the 1st of March 2055, the actual great events should occur, whereby this should also be the point in time from which the key for his statements should possibly be found and fathomed. Somehow, it seems to me, Michel Nostradamus also wanted to set a monument to himself with his works, because he wanted to remain in people's memories. Nevertheless, a seer and prophethood cannot be denied him to a certain degree, as is the case with the most diverse other seers, whose statements I have examined and clarified. But many, in my opinion, are only religiously sectarian prophets of the end of the world, who intimidate people with evil threats with hellish fear and horror by preaching and bleeding in God's punishment with all inhuman torments of hell to the pious and stupid believers, and speak of Jesus Christ and the dear God taking bloody and hellish revenge on all Christian unbelievers in persona. But the Hindus, the Buddhists, the Jews and Muslims and all other people of other faiths are not told what happens to them, because they do not belong to Christianity, But perhaps these too will be braised and roasted in hell if they have only been bestially slaughtered and murdered once and for all by the judgment of God and Jesus Christ. Just as religious sectarian seers and prophets, etc., with their erroneous assertions, introduce the faithful to this. The Third World War is supposed to play a tremendously important role in this, which, according to certain such assertions, is supposed to take place again in 1998, after the assertions in 1992, 1991, 1990, 1988, 1986, 1982, 1980, and 1979 have not been fulfilled. It may well be that by the year 1998 the entire world political situation, etc., will change in such a form that a third world fire will actually roll over the earth. But that really does not have to be the case, because in my opinion, the situation has calmed down quite a bit again, which means that there are no more signs of a third world war, at least for the time being. We also hear very little about the madman Shiranovsky.
That is indeed the case. At the moment, everything is relatively quiet and nothing points to a new or third world war. All preceding signs in manifold numbers have remained only signs that have lost their meaning and have become irrelevant. The existing danger of a third world war has finally been laid to rest for the present, and the prophecy in this regard has been averted in its realization by the rapid change in many countries and in the overall political situation of the world, which can be traced back solely to the actions of Mikhail Gorbachev.
And what do your projections, etc., result in?
We have only such until the date of the 30th of November 1994. And since our predictions for the most diverse events on Earth did not achieve any success, despite your efforts to publish, etc., we decided not to make any further predictions.
But for yourselves?
We did this only for you and for the Earth humans. For us, such predictions are not of interest and not of value, because we do not live according to predictions, prophecies, and foresight, but purposefully according to the creational natural laws and recommendations. Consequently, we would not have to fear any things of the future, which could bring us harm by our own misconduct.
Splendid. So it should be on the Earth. If a new world war should arise in the future, the Third World War, then completely new conditions would have to be created for this, which would also be different from what was the case up to now with the constant threat from many sides. I am thinking in particular of the so-called Cold War, which threatened the Earth for about 4 decades, and from which constantly new individual facts and events, etc., arose in a certain order, from which finally the Third World War would have flared up at the highest culmination if all the facts, events, and occurrences lined up together. I suppose such a course of events should not be very frequent, because wars of this kind certainly arise as a rule from certain facts or reasons, which sooner or later lead to acts of war without a series of singular actions of individuals arising as signs, as was the case during the Cold War.
That is correct. But now we should turn to our private matters.
Of course, but I still have a question. We already talked about Nostradamus. Certain folks say about him that some of his warnings and prophecies are tendentiously Jewish-Arab.
There are indeed some things true, but this is not surprising when you know that his parents were of Jewish faith, and that he was also taught in the Jewish religion as well as in Islam. Nonetheless, Nostradamus was strongly attached to the Christian faith and was quite unobjective and misguided in this regard.
That was it. Thanks. So we can now come to the private matters.